Hi, everybody. So today we're going to be focusing on the first section of the New Deal. So I'm going to look at what kind of the New Deal involved and what the point of it was. Excuse me, if we start with the big picture, so we've got FDR, he's been elected in 1932, as we've covered in a different video, and he won the presidential election with what we call a landslide victory, okay? And that means that he won by a massive margin. There was no doubt that he was the favorite for America due to the reasons that we looked at last time, such as his popularity, how much people hated Hoover, the fact that FDR was a Democrat and did want to get people out of this mess, all right? He didn't want to just leave them as Hoover did. So out of 48 states, 42 choose him, and this is a massive, massive victory. We've not seen a victory like that recently, and they choose him as their preferred candidate. But the way that it works in America, I don't know whether you watched the more recent election with Joe Biden, is that once you are elected in America, that's sort of done in November time, but you don't actually be inaugurated, which means be made president until the January. So it's actually January 1933 when he becomes president, though he's elected in 1932. So Hoover remained as president. And again, here, this is really significant. He doesn't have any power. So he's president without any power for a further 3 months. And again, here, all while, I'm sorry, I don't know why that's not changed. There, I'm just crossing that out there to my yellow highlighter. All the while, the financial crisis deepens, right? So we're going further and further into the Depression. Hoover had no sort of want to deal with the Depression anyway, and no intention to deal with the Depression, but especially now he's been elected out, you can imagine that wouldn't be up at his priority list in the last bit of his presidentship. So Roosevelt is known by his first 100 days, all right? And these are the first 100 days that he's in office, and he does a lot of significant things in these 100 days. So let's have a look at what they are. So he worked around the clock with his advisors, who became known as the Brains Trust, all right? And they want to make an enormous range of sweeping measures, okay? And this means measures in all kinds of different areas. Okay, it's not just the economy, but a lot of the ways in which he does help America do serve to help the economy. So let's have a look. So he went straight into action, and he wanted to fix the loss of confidence in the banks. He immediately tackled the banking crisis. So he ordered all of the banks to close. Now, there is a reason for that. It seems really bizarre, and remained closed until they had been checked over. And the reason he does this is because he wants to restore the confidence of the American people in these banks, all right? Because we know that during the financial crash, a lot of them lost all of their savings that were in the banks. And so he wanted to make sure that they could put their money back in the banks and that they could start earning money again. They could start loaning money to companies again to get them started up. So he wants to make sure that the American people will put their money back into these banks. So he wants to say, look, we've checked them over, we've approved them, they're absolutely fine. You can go and put your money back in. So a few days later, we've got 5,000 trustworthy banks, and they're allowed to reopen. And they were supported by government money. Now, this is why, as I'll cover in the next video, we get a lot of opposition to the New Deal. And it's because it costs the government a lot of money. And America, by this point, is used to a Republican government. So they don't want money being spent. They don't want the government to be intervening. They want things to be going on as they had been, but that's not how the Democrats work, and it's not what we need in this scenario. So Roosevelt's advisors had come up with a set of rules and regulations which will prevent the reckless speculation that had contributed to the Wall Street crash. So he wants to prevent this happening again. So these are really positive first steps. So this is the Emergency Banking Act, all right, the idea of closing the banks, and then the Securities Exchange Commission is making sure the Wall Street crash doesn't happen again. And this gives people a taste of what the New Deal is going to look like. Now, if you were to get an exam question on the New Deal, I would really advise talking about the Emergency Banking Act. Okay, and the reason for that is it's a really nice little thing to remember that had a really big effect. Okay, so that's just one thing, because remember, on an AQA paper, for any question that you get asked, you need 2 points. So if you get asked something about the New Deal, the Emergency Banking Act, and I would probably then talk about the alphabet agencies, they're two topics that you can really easily talk about. So there is a lot more to come. It wasn't just sorting out the banks that was on his list. So people didn't know what was going on, but they knew something was happening and something good for them. So he sent 15 proposals to Congress, and all 15 were adopted in these 100 days. Now, that's a lot for a president, but obviously we know he's a man on the mission. He's got a job to do. So he took time to explain to the American people what he was doing and why he was doing it. So on a Sunday, he broadcast on radio. Now, radio is a relatively new thing in this period. It's really big in the 1930s, radio. And this is another way in which Roosevelt is this new kind of president. He's communicating with the people. He's telling them his plans. He's really making sure that they know what he's doing to help them. And these were called his fireside chats. So we're used to politicians, you know, we see them on social media, we see them in the news, we see them on TV, we see politicians everywhere, even in the jungle as of late. But it's not normal at this time for people to hear from their president apart from in an organized speech. All right. So this is really revolutionary for Roosevelt. So I'm not going to go through this part, these two up here, because we're going to do the alphabet agencies a little bit further on. But another one of the things in the 100 days, which we know Roosevelt promised in his election campaign, was the ending of prohibition. And this is really important. It's one of the things that gets so many people to vote for him, but also it gets a lot more money back into the economy. So this is the 21st Amendment to the Constitution, which was ratified, which means passed by all the different states at the end of the year. And that made prohibition, it repealed prohibition, all right? It made it legal to drink again. So these have an immediate effect, and they restore confidence in the government, which is really important after Hoovervilles and Hoover blankets and all of that during the Depression. Reporters who traveled the country brought back reports to the new spirit to be seen around the USA. And historians agree that these did have a really positive effect. So this is what he calls priming the pump, okay, or pump priming. So you can have a look here. I'm not going to go through this all in too much detail, but how the new cycle of prosperity works. Okay, and again, it's all about creating that demand for goods, but also making sure that people have enough money to be able to buy those goods. So, importantly, not everybody supports the New Deal. And as I've said, that's one of the reasons, is because there is so much government spending to do with it. So let's have a look at who was against it. So some people saw Roosevelt as being dictatorial rather than democratic, just because he was taking charge so fiercely. But again, this is what the American people needed, but they're not used to this style of leadership. So a lot of people found this to be off-putting. Some accused the alphabet agencies of being a waste of money. Right, he pumps a lot of money into it to get money back out of it, and some of them are eventually disbanded. Now we'll go into the alphabet agencies in more detail next in the next video. So some examples of opposition. So Father Coughlin, he was a priest and known as the radio priest. He was based in Detroit, and he had a national audience for his broadcasts. At first, he supported it. All right, so he wasn't completely against it the entire time. And he forms the Union for Social Justice, which had over 7 million members. Now that sounds a lot to us, but in America at the time, it's not a massively significant amount of money. So amount of people. So his ideas are often confused, but his key message was that the New Deal was not doing enough for society. Okay, they weren't helping enough in his view, but it became clear that he had much more in common with groups such as the Nazi Party. And for him, the New Deal was the Jew deal, and he would preach this to his gullible listeners. So these people he's influencing basically anti-democracy. Okay. Then we've got Francis Townsend. He opposes Roosevelt in the 1936 election, which Roosevelt wins again with absolutely no problem. And he became famous for the Townsend Plan, which is that everybody over the age of 60 should get a pension of $200 a month, provided they spent the money during the month and gave up their jobs. Now, this is to put money back into the economy again, all right? But this includes more government spending. This will create jobs for young people, create a demand for goods, and help the old people who've not been looked after. Many old people liked this, and it also helped push the Social Security Act of 1935, which did introduce old age pensions. So it's not so much that Francis Townsend was against what Roosevelt was doing, but he wanted to do more than it. All right. He didn't think that the New Deal went far enough. Then we've got Huey Long, who was a Democrat. So he's the same party as Roosevelt. He denounced the rich and the banks, so the people who were benefiting from this, and created the Share Our Wealth scheme. So this is created with the motto, every man a king. This proposed a new wealth distribution measures in the form of a net asset tax to curb poverty and homelessness that went on during the Great Depression. So he wanted federal spending on public work, schools and colleges, and old age pensions. So he wants more government spending. He was, and again, we see how he is starting as a supporter of this and then goes against it. But he planned his own presidential bid in 1936, but he's assassinated in 1935. Okay. So we do then have opposition from the Supreme Court, and this is a problem, as we'll see. So one of its functions of the Supreme Court is to judge whether laws passed by Congress are consistent with the terms of the American Constitution. So if they find that they're not consistent, they can block these laws, which is a problem for Roosevelt. From the start, from the New Deal, it was clear that Roosevelt would have problems with the court. The 9 judges were fairly conservative, so they're more Republican than they are Democrat, and cautious. There is a chance that they're not going to pass something to do with the New Deal. So this happens in 35 when they found the National Industrial Recovery Act to be unconstitutional. And also, so this is what we're talking about before, the NRA, the AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. So they disbanded those alphabet agencies, which obviously has a bad effect on the people who they were helping. And Roosevelt thought this was terrible, okay, because their views were affecting the entire country. So he wanted to change the way in which the Supreme Court was working so that he would have more things passed. Roosevelt wanted to appoint 6 of his own choice to the Supreme Court, which was not allowed because it would give him control over the court, which is more like a dictator, right? They're there to kind of make sure the president isn't taking advantage. So they think that one of the way that their freedom is ensured is by making sure that politicians cannot interfere with the work of the judges. It would never be approved, and he was forced to back down and withdraw his plan in the end. But the Supreme Court had been shaken by Roosevelt's actions and was less obstructive in the future. And most of the main measures in his second New Deal were approved by the court from 1937 onwards. So we do definitely have significant opposition to the New Deal in terms of the Supreme Court, but we can see that Roosevelt got around that. These particular individuals, then they don't have enough clout themselves. They're never going to be elected, especially Huey Long, considering he's assassinated in the meantime, but they don't have enough power to kind of stop the New Deal in its tracks. And the New Deal does carry on with limited success, it has to be said. But again, we'll measure the success in the next video. There's the World War II coming along, saves America from the financial crash in the end. Okay, so thank you for tuning into this video, and please join me in the next one where we'll finish off the New Deal. Thank you.